8:15 a.m., the 6th of August, 1945. Deep in the bunker beneath the Imperial Palace, where the ticking of a clock echoed like the heartbeat of a dying empire, a terse telegram from Hiroshima shattered everything. The city has been destroyed. Unknown type of weapon. Communications lost. The generals glanced at one another in silence. Among these defeated soldiers, there were still those who believed something was wrong with the report. It couldn't be that a single bomb could annihilate an entire city. It couldn't be that America, the nation they had once dismissed as soft, materialistic, had created a weapon of the gods. But then, with each passing minute, fragments of the truth arrived, and the entire machinery of deception they had built over the past 3 years began to collapse under its own weight. Returning to the heart of the story, that morning of the 6th of August, 1945, Tokyo lay shrouded in the pale light of a summer scorched by bombs. On the surface, charred buildings still smoked, their walls stripped to skeletons like relics of a bygone era. But far below ground, 90 feet beneath the Imperial Palace, everything proceeded in the familiar cold order, the Monday morning intelligence briefing. No one in that bunker knew that in just a few minutes, the world they understood would be upended entirely. The 4-foot-thick concrete bunker exuded dampness and the scent of metal. On the long table, maps sagged under pins laden with notes, red arrows marking failed campaigns that no one had bothered to erase. Marshal Shinroku Hata sat at the head, flipping through report pages like a ritual of controlled collapse. The war had entered its 4th year, but in this bunker, people still spoke of faith, as if it could substitute for fuel, artillery shells, and steel. 8:15. Urgent footsteps echoed from the corridor. The heavy steel door burst open, slamming against the wall with a sharp clang that made everyone look up. Lieutenant Colonel Tishi Yamamoto, the liaison officer from Hiroshima, command burst in, his uniform soaked in sweat, his eyes red as if he had run through hell itself. He offered no salute, only thrusting forward a crumpled sheet of paper bearing a telegram cut off mid-sentence. Hata frowned. He was unaccustomed to chaos. Yamamoto gasped for breath, speaking curtly. "The last telegram from Hiroshima, sir." The room fell into an eerie stillness. Umezu, the chief of the general staff, took the paper and read it slowly. "The city has been completely destroyed. Catastrophic casualties. Unknown type of weapon. Request immediate instructions. Communications lost." No one spoke for several seconds. The only sound was the staccato chatter of the telegraph from the adjacent room. Umezu read it again, then a third time, as if his pronunciation might alter the content. Then he set the paper down, sighing. "It could be a massive incendiary bombing," he said, "the largest yet." A young intelligence officer, Lieutenant Colonel Mori, stepped forward, his voice firm. "Last night's radar reports detected only 3 B-29 seconds in the Hiroshima area. Sir, if it were incendiaries, there would have to be at least hundreds." The room turned to him. A dry chuckle rose from the back. Maybe the radar malfunctioned. Or the Americans are spreading disinformation. Mori fell silent. He scanned the stifling room, where familiar faces now seemed shrouded in mist. He knew well, in the intelligence archives, there had been countless reports warning that America was developing a high-energy weapon, but every such report had been dismissed with notes: exaggerated, unverified, Western propaganda. Umezu rose, pacing around the table. "No bomb exists that can destroy a city in a single drop. That's impossible," he said it as if to himself. But those in the room heard the certainty drain from his voice. At the far end of the table, Colonel Hideaki Sato, the head of industrial analysis, sat quietly, his hand gripping a thick dossier tightly. Inside were the figures he had gathered over 6 months, proving America's production power far exceeded all estimates. But Sato had never been allowed to present them. He understood that, at this point, truth was unwelcome. On the table, the telegram lay there, its final line torn midway like an unhealed wound. Unknown type of weapon. Mori stared at the ink-smeared characters, then around the room. The aged generals, the officers bent over, taking notes, those who still believed that, with enough discipline, they could slow down reality itself. He understood the thing they feared was not the bomb, but the collapse of everything they had believed in all their lives. Above ground, the sun shone as it did every day. No one in the bunker knew that the light they saw was the reflection from the mushroom cloud rising in the southwest, where Hiroshima no longer existed. And in that bunker, the war continued, at least in the minds of those unwilling to believe it had ended. All right, dear audience, before we dive into the main part of the story, please comment with the number 1, or let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. That morning in Tokyo stretched on unusually. In the deep bunker, no one left their post. Scout reports streamed in continuously via telegraph lines, each one terse, each line thickening the air further. A communications officer rushed in, his voice trembling. Confirmation from the Fukuoka observation post. Over Hiroshima's sky. Only 3B. 29 seconds. The words landed like a stone in dead water. Every head snapped up. 3. Marshal Hata echoed, as if hoping for a different number. The soldier nodded. Precisely, sir. 3. No escorts. No mass bombing formation. For a moment, the room was so quiet, one could hear the telegraph machine ticking like an erratic heartbeat. Then reactions erupted. Impossible. The radar must be faulty. Maybe they used electronic decoys. It could just be reconnaissance. Each hypothesis was thrown out like a lifeline, grasped tighter the more fragile it was. Lieutenant Colonel Mori, the youngest in the intelligence group, tried to keep his voice steady. Gentlemen, there are no signs of an incendiary attack. The smoke column from Hiroshima was visible from 150 miles away, higher than the cloud layer. He paused, swallowing hard. One pilot said, "It had the shape of a mushroom." The final words jolted the room. No one spoke, but all eyes turned to the wall map. Hiroshima. A small dot circled in red. In the dim bunker light, that red dot looked like a bleeding wound. Another intelligence officer, the old General Kuroda, shot to his feet, his face flushed. A mushroom cloud. Nonsense. That's a fire reaction. No such weapon exists. The Americans just want to scare us. He slammed his fist on the table. It's propaganda. No one replied. From afar, a loudspeaker from the information center blared an urgent wire from the west. A blinding light brighter than the sun, followed by a shockwave, winds strong enough to topple trains. The city is no longer visible. Mori inhaled deeply, his throat parched. He glanced through the door slit, seeing the fluorescent lights flickering on the concrete ceiling. Suddenly, he realized something. The entire room was listening, but no one was truly hearing. They weren't seeking truth. They were seeking a reason to believe the truth was wrong. Colonel Sato, still seated at the table's corner, spoke softly. If only 3 planes produced this result, then that weapon can't compare to anything we know. His eyes locked on Kuroda. You once said, the Americans were only good at consumer goods. Could it be? We were wrong about what they were truly producing? Kuroda fell silent. A strange void spread. No one wanted to meet eyes. Sato opened the thick dossier, pulling out a report rejected months earlier. We once detected signals of a massive American scientific project. They called it Manhattan, but superiors deemed it fabrication. At that moment, the lights flickered. A faint tremor shook the floor, shattering a few teacups. Above ground, Tokyo was enduring another minor air raid. Below, that distant rumble served as a mocking reminder. Even as reality hammered the walls, they were still debating if it was real. By midday, the first reconnaissance pilot over Hiroshima radioed back in a trembling voice. Nothing left. Just flat earth. The city center gone. The words echoed through the internal speaker, stunning everyone silent. Someone hissed. Maybe he missighted. Maybe it's smoke. But then the images arrived. A colossal cloud column, swirling, glowing at its core like a stationary storm. Purples and oranges mingling with the white steam. Everyone stared, but no one uttered a word. Sato broke the silence first. Gentlemen, if this isn't incendiaries, then we're facing something that has never been named. The statement fell over the room like a death sentence. From afar, the air raid siren wailed again, moaning like a lament. Hata rose, his face expressionless, ordering, "Halt all non-essential communications. Confirm nothing to the press." The steel door closed, locking tight. In the bunker's dim gloom, they sat there, men who once believed spirit could conquer steel, now trembling before a weapon that rendered language meaningless. And in that moment, the war between truth and denial began. Afternoon descended on Tokyo in heavy silence. The sun hid behind a haze of smoke, its light filtering through the iron grill in the bunker, casting everything in the hue of tarnished bronze. All morning, scattered reports from Hiroshima had poured in. Mushroom cloud images, temperatures beyond measurement, trains melting like wax. There was no doubt anymore the city had vanished. But in the underground strategy room, silence was maintained by iron discipline. No one was permitted to utter the two words, atomic bomb. At precisely 4 p.m., steady footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Colonel Hideaki Sato entered, clutching a thick brown-bound dossier stamped "Top Secret, Unapproved." He placed it on the table without a bow. Hata eyed him through thick glasses, his gaze weary but unable to hide the growing bewilderment. "Colonel, you say there's an urgent report?" Sato nodded, opening the cover. A cascade of figures, charts, factory schematics emerged. His voice was low, even, like reading an obituary for a dead faith. "We've tracked American industrial capacity since 1941. These numbers are verified from every source available." He pointed to the board, lines of text appearing under the light. 88,410 tanks, 41 aircraft carriers, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2,434,000 trucks, 17 million rifles, 41 billion rounds of ammunition. No one spoke, only the scratch of pencils on the table, which then stopped. Sato continued, "We produce 20 times less than them in every category. But this isn't the worst. The worst is that we knew it early on." A bead of sweat trickled down his neck. The light reflected off dusty pages, where notes were crossed out in red ink. Unnecessary to disclose. Exaggerated report. Impact on fighting spirit. Those veto orders bore the signatures of the very people in this room. Sato turned a new page gently. Beneath the thin paper lay figures no longer of battlefields but of another realm, science. Our intelligence network detected at least 4 secret American research sites. Oak Ridge, Hanford, Los Alamos, Chicago. He looked up, his voice catching. Los Alamos alone consumed more electricity than all of Tokyo. A chill draft stirred through the ventilation, rustling the final page. That project involved over 130,000 engineers and physicists. Total cost, $2 billion. He paused. More than our entire annual defense budget. The room was deathly still. Hatta sat like a stone statue. Those who once shouted slogans of spirit over matter now avoided each other's gazes. On the wall, the Pacific map with hundreds of red pins, each a failed campaign, now resembled a canvas of dried blood. Sato drew a breath, speaking softly but clearly. We never understood our enemy. We thought them weak, for their democracy, divided by their wealth, lazy from their abundance. But they used that very wealth to create something we couldn't even imagine. An elderly officer closed his eyes gently, as if one more figure would stop his heart. In their minds, every theory of victory dissolved, the belief that samurai spirit would compensate for weak industry, that America would collapse from casualties, that will could bend matter. All wrong. Sato closed the dossier. That faint sound echoed in the thick air, like a coffin lid shutting. He spoke slowly. Gentlemen, if the Americans can destroy a city with one bomb, these numbers no longer matter. We're no longer fighting in the same reality as them. No one reacted. Each stared into the void before him, where the light gleamed off the cold steel table. Somewhere above, Hiroshima's sky still smoked, and American scientists were likely noting their test results in calm voices. In the Tokyo bunker, they heard no bombs, saw no light, only another sound. The cracking of faith, small but deep, spreading through every soul. And in that moment, they didn't yet know that tonight, another empire would declare war. Night of the 7th of August, 1945. Tokyo swallowed by darkness, only faint lantern light flickering on concrete walls. Outside, monsoon winds whipped through half-burned streets, splintered wood clattering like ghostly footsteps in a dead city. In the deep underground bunker, the air hung stifling, ready to burst. A telegraph signal buzzed. The steady chatter halted abruptly, like a breath cut short. The communications clerk entered, holding a sweat-dampened scrap of paper. No one needed it read aloud. Just the scrawled line. Molotov's Soviet Declaration of War on Japan official. Effective 0000 hours August 9. For seconds, the room plunged into absolute stillness. Only the slow whir of the ventilation fan. Then, reflexively, every eye turned to the Manchuria map on the wall, where red lines marked the Kwantung Army positions, the Empire's last pride. Now it was just a cloth riddled with pinholes. Marshal Hatta said nothing. He merely closed his eyes briefly, his shoulders trembling slightly, like hearing a bowstring snap in the dark. It was the sound of a delusion dissolving. For months, Japanese diplomats had clung to a fragile hope that Stalin, enemy to both America and Britain, might mediate an endurable peace. But with Molotov's declaration, it all crumbled like a house of cards. News of the Soviets spread faster than excuses. Within hours, command posts received reports: Red Army crossing Manchuria's borders, tanks flooding the plains like a steel storm, defenses pierced in a single day. No victories, only disintegration. In Tokyo that night, no one slept. Officers sat around the table, cold teacups in rows, cigarette smoke curling like fog. They no longer discussed strategy, but miracles. A few tried convincing themselves that the Americans can't sustain a two-ocean war, that the Soviets are just posturing for diplomatic gain. But even they didn't believe their own words. As the night deepened, northern dispatches grew more desperate. Kwantung forces encircled, heavy artillery abandoned in fields, communications sporadic. A Manchuria commander sent a final wire. We have no vehicles left, no ammunition, nothing to defend with. Then, silence. In the bunker, a young officer glanced involuntarily at the ceiling, as if hoping to hear footsteps above civilians, the city, or just the wind. He wondered how much longer Tokyo could endure when what they faced wasn't just enemies, but the speed of reality itself. Colonel Sato quietly opened the documents before him. He pulled out a fresh map, shaded with American military supply routes. "They're arming the Soviets from their own production lines," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "Trucks, artillery, communications gear, all from their factories. They're not just feeding their own troops, they're feeding their allies." No one responded, but the words twisted like a slow knife. For years, Japan had believed America materialistic, unable to endure casualties, incapable of prolonged war. Now, the brutal truth lay bare. Americans fought on two oceans, supported two alliances, and still had power to create unimaginable weapons. An old soldier whispered, "If they can fight in both Western Europe and the Pacific, what can't they do?" No one answered. In the damp, cold bunker, fear was no longer falling bombs but the silence tightening around throats. Above ground, Tokyo's night was smoke-blind, the scent of coal and charred wood mingling in the wind. To the southwest, where Hiroshima once stood, a strange red glow lingered on the horizon. Some said it was firelight. Others called it the light of a new era, the light humanity should never have seen. Near midnight, Sato stepped into the corridor. He paused by the emergency exit, peering at the pitch-black sky through a narrow vent slit. He thought of all the years they had chosen not to believe the truth. A haunting question echoed in his mind. If we knew and still refused to look, what difference from the blind? From afar, thunder rumbled, or perhaps a real explosion. Who could tell anymore? Sato kept his eyes on the sky. He knew it was only the beginning. And as the clock ticked into August 8, somewhere north, Soviet tanks rolled through the night like shadows that never rested. In Tokyo, no one knew that, in just 2 days, another sun would rise again, and this time, it would kill all hope. What do you think will happen? Are you still here, my audience? If you find the story intriguing, don't hesitate to comment with the number 1 to await the most gripping part of the tale. Morning of the 9th of August 1945. Tokyo still reeled in exhaustion from the Soviet declaration when another telegraph signal arrived. At first, just a short string of characters, cut off amid jumbled dispatches. Nagasaki, attacked. City destroyed. No one in Supreme Command believed it immediately. Those who had witnessed Hiroshima were still convincing themselves it was an anomaly, a one-off experiment, a war aberration. But when the second bulletin came, the dispatcher's voice quavering, unknown type of weapon, massive casualties, communications lost. Silence enveloped the bunker like frost on molten metal. On the map, Nagasaki was just a small dot in the south, yet that dot now circled in black ink. Another city, vaporized. Twice in 4 days. 2 suns rising without dawn. The officers stopped talking. They didn't need to. Everyone understood, no more doubts to cling to. But it was precisely then that true fear crept in. Fear not of the bombs, but of the meaninglessness of their entire strategy. General Umezu stood motionless before the large map, fluorescent lights casting cold white streaks across his face. He realized every military assumption built over 4 years, concentrated defense, fight to the last man, turn every city into a fortress, was futile. A weapon that could erase a city in one pulse made every notion of defense a joke. Beside him, Colonel Sato flipped through the old report. The figures now meant nothing. He added a line in red ink. No strategy remains viable against a weapon that can end war in the blink of an eye. Outside, the air raid siren wailed faintly, then died. No one rushed to shelters anymore. Tokyo's people had grown accustomed to death's sound, inured to the point of not hiding. In a small room above, a young telegraph operator placed his hand on the overheating equipment, running non-stop day and night, his eyes vacant. He thought of his mother in Nagasaki. No news, nothing, just a colossal flash in the sky and then silence. In Supreme Command, the emergency meeting began at 5 p.m. No more debate, no reasons left to deny. Marshal Hatta sat ramrod straight, his voice hoarse. They can continue like this, one city at a time. The words drifted through the room like a death knell. Some bowed their heads, others stared at the ceiling, as if seeking the sun goddess in the concrete walls. Sato scanned the room, seeing faces he once knew well, men who believed Bushido spirit could overturn an industrial storm. Now, they were no longer warriors, just old men in the dark, awaiting a miracle that would never come. Outside, rumors spread faster than wind. The Americans might have more bombs, 3, 5, or 10. No one knew exactly, but any number sufficed to plunge the nation into despair. Another silence descended, deeper than silence itself. It was the stillness of realization, when humanity understands every path leads to the same end. Night fell. In the bunker, the Emperor was summoned for the briefing. No pomp, just a simple wooden chair placed mid-room. As Sato recounted the truth, his voice trembled. He was no longer an officer reading reports, he was confessing. The Emperor was silent for a long time. At last, he spoke slowly, his voice deep and even. If we continue, the Japanese people will cease to exist, to surrender. Everyone bowed. No one dared breathe loudly. That night's diary entry by Cabinet Secretary Sakumizu read, "The Emperor saw what the generals dared not admit. We are fighting a war where the enemy can erase us without advancing a step." Far-off skies hung with black clouds like cooled ash. The world had just witnessed a new power, not the might of armies, but the might of those who used knowledge to reshape matter. In Tokyo, Sato stepped into the dark corridor, his hand trembling slightly. He heard a Western radio broadcast drifting from somewhere in the city, a tiny melody adrift in the quiet night. He realized this nation had never lost a ground battle, it had lost the battle for truth. And as he turned back to the sealed steel door of Supreme Command bunker, he knew, inside, those men were still plotting to hold out one more day. They didn't understand that tomorrow, that very faith would explode. The 10th of August 1945. Tokyo awoke to a strange silence. No sirens, no planes, only the faint murmur of a ruined city breathing weakly. But underground, where Supreme Command convened for the second time in 3 days, the atmosphere hung heavy as a storm about to break. On the long green baize-covered table, the wire via Swiss channels lay in a silver tray. Japan accepts the Potsdam Declaration, with one condition, the Emperor's position preserved. A fragile demand, but the last thread between honor and unconditional surrender. The generals sat mute, only the tap of a pen on the table. Outside, the electric fan whirred slowly like a dying breath. Sato leaned against the wall, observing. He noted the oddity. This room, once debating global strategy, now held only gaunt faces wrestling to accept that war had outstripped human will. 2 days later, America's reply arrived. Concise, ambiguous, and cold. The Emperor will be subject to the Supreme Commander of the Allied powers. His status will be determined by the free will of the Japanese people. The phrasing seemed diplomatic, but to many in the room, it was the knife severing the final thread. A chill wind raced through the bunker. General Anami, representing the hardliners, clenched his fist until blood welled. He stared at the wire, then at his peers. No one dared meet his eyes. Without words, all understood what he thought. Surrender like this was tantamount to erasing Japan. From that instant, a smoldering fire ignited the final resistance, not against the enemy, but against reality itself. Night of August 12. The palace corridors drowned in shadow. A group of young officers loyal to Anami met quietly, plotting Operation Ketsugo. Seize the radio station, prevent the emperor from announcing surrender, rally the nation, to fight to the end. They believed one lucky strike, one miracle, would force negotiations. In their minds, the atomic bombs were not proof of defeat, but psychological blows to break the weak-willed. Sato did not join that meeting. He sat alone in his small office, yellow lamplight spilling over unbound dossiers. Outside, rain pattered on the hatch lid, mingling with the fuzzy murmur of Western radio from a jammed broadcast. He knew that uprising could change nothing, only prolong one bloody night. But deep down, he understood, they weren't betraying the nation. They simply couldn't bear the thought that their honor ended with a signature under the enemy's flag. August 13. Small explosions dotted Tokyo, signs a faction of the military had mutinied. The radio station's doors barricaded. Telegraph lines severed. In the bunker, Hata and Umezu heard the news, exchanging only silent glances. Both knew war had ended in theory, but the final battle between illusion and truth raged on. That night, the emperor ordered the surrender broadcast recorded. His voice quavered slightly, but each word rang clear. Things unbearable must be endured. When the recording was sealed, guards carried it into the dark amid a smoky Tokyo. A group of officers tried to seize the tape but failed. Blood spilled in the palace corridors, where honor and despair collided in the last instant. Dawn of August 15. The broadcast aired nationwide. People listened on crackling radios amid ruined homes. The emperor's unfamiliar voice, for the first time in history, echoed like a call from another world. No one grasped every archaic phrase, but all felt one thing. The war had truly ended. In Supreme Command Bunker, Sato sat still. Each radio word sliced like a knife through old walls of belief. When the broadcast ended, he rose, scanning the room where he had endured life's longest days. Everyone remained seated, speechless. Some wept. Others stared blankly at the Pacific map, where red arrows lingered like witnesses to a stillborn dream. Sato sighed. He knew from now on, they must learn to fight differently, not with bullets, but with memory. But as he gazed at the vent overhead, faint light filtering down, he felt an odd sensation that the darkness hadn't yet left this place. Morning of the 2nd of September, 1945. Over Tokyo Bay, the sky gleamed like glass. The sea lay unnaturally calm, mirroring formations of planes arrayed in the air, gray steel ships anchored in lines stretching to the horizon. Amid that sea of humanity and metal, the USS Missouri loomed like a marker cleaving history. On one side, the era of war. On the other, the era of reckoning. Japan's imperial delegates ascended the deck, their dark robes pressed flat as if ironed with desperation. Among them, Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu limped slowly on crutches. An old wound made him hobble, but his face held an eerie calm. Behind, General Yoshijiro Umezu maintained the chill of a man who had exhausted his pride. The deck air hung thick. Across the table, General Douglas MacArthur stood tall, sunlight glinting off his peaked cap, reflecting off the sea like a steel streak. The American, British, Soviet, Chinese, Australian delegations, all present, each embodying a shard of the power that had crushed the Japanese Empire. But no taunts, no glee, only vast, metallic silence. As Shigemitsu leaned to sign the surrender document, the pen's scrape on paper rang clear. like a knife carving the century's surface. Ink spread, black and bold, then dried. A nation bowed. A culture bowed. Not from fear, but because there was nothing left to say to truth. Overhead, engines droned low. Hundreds of American planes flew past, wings eclipsing the sun, light blocked, casting a vast shadow over the deck. Shigemitsu looked up, seeing the sky fractured by steel wings. He understood. This was no single nation's victory, but a civilization's. Afar, Admiral Toyota stood silent by the rail. Sea wind tugged his coat tails, his eyes tracing the massive anchored ships. They built this vessel while fighting on two oceans, he had once said. Now, gazing at the Missouri, he knew that understated it. For Americans didn't just fight, they forged industry to fight. They struck with one hand bound, yet still choked an empire. After the ceremony, Sato, once huddled in Tokyo's dark bunker, now stood at the pier's edge with a few surviving officers. He eyed the American fleet, blanketing the sea, his gaze mirroring the cold gleam of steel. In his mind, the old report's figures echoed: 88,410 tanks, 41 carriers, 130,000 scientists. No longer data. They were steel tombstones for illusions. As the Japanese delegation left the deck, no one looked back. They descended the gangway, passing between ranks of stern American guards. No jeers, no cheers. Only the steady lap of waves against the hull, like a countdown to an era's end. Later, in occupation interrogations, General Umezu wrote a line that chilled many. The atomic bomb didn't kill us. It merely proved we had died long before, from the moment we chose illusion over truth. In the days that followed, as American troops landed on Japanese soil, Sato witnessed firsthand what he had read in reports: an American division hauling more trucks than the entire Imperial Army possessed. They erected field hospitals with power, water, nurses, while Tokyo civilians caught rain in buckets. He realized this defeat wasn't strategic but of mindset. That autumn in Tokyo, skies so clear they left one feeling exposed. Children ran under charred tree canopies. Adults patched roofs with discarded GI tarps. Sato walked the rubble, a copy of the report, Why We Failed, in his pocket. He never published it, but read it nightly, like atonement. Near life's end, he added a trembling line: we didn't lose for lack of guns, but for refusing to learn to face reality head-on. That day's sky was peacefully eerie. Young American soldiers smiled. Elderly Japanese stayed silent. No one knew what to say, for truth loomed too vast, humanity too small. Amid the calm sea, the Missouri anchored immense and still like history's courtroom. And in the hush after the final wave, one unanswered question lingered: has humanity truly learned anything after beholding the light of its own destruction? When the war ended, Japan was no longer the nation that had known itself. Streets burned bare, bridges snapped in two, fields turned to ash. But amid that ruin, something new began to form: an understanding born from defeat. The American occupiers came not as conquerors, but as engineers bearing lights, books, and the strange order of an industry they trusted utterly. The Japanese, for the first time, saw a society where power stemmed not just from guns, but from knowledge. In the years after, those who had lived in Tokyo's bunker shadows began rewriting their memories. They recounted the illusions that had blinded them, and the costly lesson that courage cannot replace understanding, that will cannot surpass science, and that every nation, no matter how proud, crumbles when it chooses faith over truth. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not just a war's end. They were a mirror reflecting humanity's essence. When knowledge grows strong enough to birth gods, yet the heart remains frail enough to unleash the light it cannot control. And perhaps the true question lies not in the past. It lies in the present, where humanity still forges other bombs, different in form but not in nature. Do we have the courage not to repeat the light of our own destruction? If this video touches you, leave a comment. I have seen the light beyond the ashes. Because sometimes, if we dare to face truth squarely, that alone is the only way the world avoids the abyss of darkness. Don't forget to leave your comment. Share this story with the American audience.